It is lovely to be here and to follow Danny, who greeted me in the green room with the warmest hug. We just met, and here she is hugging me. It was lovely. It's an honor to be here with all of you, a real privilege, and also to follow the incredible speakers we've been hearing from. I'm inspired and a little bit intimidated and motivated, and so just thrilled to be here with all of you as we enter into this experience together. There are three things I want to talk about related to emerging, when I really thought about emerging women and what I'd like to share. And the first is, when we think about emerging, I started thinking about change, growth and change. And I thought, well, what's the difference between emerging and changing? And I think the difference is that with emerging, we're changing into our better selves. And when you're just changing, that could be changing in most any directions. And if you think about the definitions we've been seeing on the screens about emerging, to come into being, we think if you happen to Google emerging, you'll see becoming authentic, and you'll see unfolding, being revealed. All of these words that imply that we're getting somehow to the truth, that we're looking for what's in there rather than striving to be something different than we are. And that can be tough, because really when we think about emerging, sometimes we want to just change. And we see other people around us. Listening to Brene last night, I found myself wanting to be more vulnerable. And listening to Wookie this morning, I thought, I want to be a really great storyteller. And then listening to Ariana, I thought, I want to be Ariana. I just do, but that's not going to happen. So I can only be my own best self, right? So we all need to look inward and dig deep and then shed some of the crap and be our best selves. So that's what I want to do around emerging and what I invite you to do with me. That was the first thing. And the second thing is that emerging isn't something that happens at one point or when we're young. This is a lifelong thing. And I remember telling someone a couple of months ago, I'm going to have the opportunity to speak at this conference called Emerging Women. And they said, is that women who are earlier in their careers, or is it women from emerging countries? Like, both and neither? All of the above? Like, emerging is something that happens from when we're very young, if we're lucky and we have some sense of self-awareness, and through our lives, if we have the strength to stay with it. I consider myself really fortunate to have an amazing mother. And when I think about emerging through a life, when I was in graduate school, kind of heads down, developing the habit you heard about earlier of not enough sleep, I talked to my mom one day, and she told me she was going to quit her job. Now, my mother is, by academic training, a theologian. She was a professor turned university administrator after a while. And what she was finding was that as she got more responsibility and more senior in the university, she was spending more time on football and less time on education. And she said, Karen, I love a good football game, but I'm spending an awful lot of time raising money for it. I don't think I'm having impact. So she quit. And she went off for a few weeks to a seminar for women at Bryn Mawr, and she thought about what she wanted to do with her life. And she came back and became the executive director of a group in LA called Adolescent Pregnancy Child Watch. She said, I want to do something that's going to help these women get their lives on the right track, and I want to do something where I can see the impact. And it really stayed with me because she was 50 at the time, which seemed very old at the time. Some so fortunate to have had that role model of her at 50 saying, it's time for me to dig a little bit deeper, shed a layer, and pay attention to my purpose in life. And if we had longer than we have tonight, I would tell you about the job she just took in her late 70s, and where she said, it's time. I wasn't sure I was going to do it, but you know what? I really care about this, so I'm going for it. And what a role model in the course of her life. So I think we can all be that kind of role model, both for ourselves, and I see Annalisa in the front row there, and daughters, to be able to think about emerging both in the moment and through the span of life. And in a sense, the lifelong aspects of of emerging, really let you have some patience with yourself. Like if it doesn't work today, it might tomorrow. So you just hang on. So that's the second part. It's lifelong. And then third is that emerging is hard. I was listening to the speakers this conference. We've heard about tears, about people rolling in balls on the floor, right? Crying. We've heard about people falling down, and I'm visualizing it literally, I don't know about you guys, and being lifted up by friends. Like this emerging stuff is hard. So I want to share a few thoughts that I think can help as we go at it and go at it and pick ourselves up and go at it again. 3 things I think can help. And one is insight. When you're really listening to yourself and paying attention to the stories that you're telling yourself and your self-deceptions, and noticing where in your body you start to feel defensiveness. You know where that is? For each of you, it's all different for all of us. You sort of know that. When you're really paying attention to those kinds of signals, and then you're really paying attention to the signals from your community around you, that kind of insight can help you be open and ready to do the kind of digging that you're going to need to do to emerge. And that insight is aided for me personally by my mindfulness and meditation practices. It's funny, I got interested in mindfulness probably now 15 years ago or so. I was noticing myself going from coaching client to coaching client, and whatever else was happening in my life, I was sort of dedicating part of my brain to that. And I thought, oh man, these people, like this is their 1 hour a week or 1 hour a month that somebody's really listening to them. I got to be all in listening to them. And the best way I found to do that was cultivating a practice of being really, really present. My mind and my body in the same place. So I followed the writings of John Kabat-Zinn for a long time, working on my mindfulness practice. And I had the true honor and privilege of interviewing him a few years ago. And I said, all right, John, I've been really working the mindfulness thing. Do I actually have to do the meditation part? Or can I just like skip the sitting still for 20 minutes in the morning part? Because it's hard to make time and I get kind of antsy. But I'm really working on the being present in the moment. And in his lovely and loving way, he said, Karen, at the end of the day, the thing that matters is how you're showing up for yourself and other people all day long. So that part's good. But really, what meditation does is it helps you build the muscle and the capability to be present. And by meditating with some regularity, you practice that, literally, over and over and over. And that helps you show up with more mindfulness when things get really tough. And so when I think about insight, and I think about how we can use insight to help ourselves grow, in a sense for me, it's about finding a way to be present in order to be able to listen and pay attention and really catch myself in all those mental games that we play. So the insight is one, and the second is courage. We've talked a lot about courage last night and today. It was one of the words I wrote down underneath my permission slip. And And when I think about courage, think about a couple of things. It's all kinds of things, but let me pick two. And one is you have to be willing to disappoint. How many of you are pleasers? Okay, more than half. When you think about disappointing, it can be tough. And for me, as sort of the ultra pleaser, it's tough to disappoint people I don't even know. Like somebody who's serving me a glass of water at a restaurant. Oh, I meant still and not sparkling. Oh, that's okay. You know, it's like to an extreme. And yeah, it's a problem. And so I'm lucky enough to have a brother who's temperamentally a lot like me. And probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe a little more than that now, we were talking about how, man, it is just so hard to disappoint when you're a people person, but you got to be able to do it. So we came up with this little scheme where we called it our disappointment a day diet. And every day, each of us had to find someone to disappoint. Could be anyone. And if you really had to dig deep, you could like create something, like offer something to someone you didn't know and then take it back. Like but you had to do something to disappoint someone. You had to find someone to say, no, I'm not going to do that, or I didn't do it, or I don't care. And we would call each other and we'd say, who'd you disappoint and how'd it go? And it was kind of fun to do it because, you know, you had to come up with something. And at the end of our little experiment, what we learned is that when you disappoint people, you don't die. Amazing. It's a revelation. You don't. And it is literally, to this day, when I need to disappoint someone, I kind of have to kind of screw up my courage, speaking of courage, and go like, okay, I'm not going to die. They're going to be fine. I just need to say the word no. And it pops out. So willing to disappoint is part of the courage. And I recommend the disappointment a day diet if this is something that would help you. The other thing you need to be able to do is fail. We've heard a bit about failure. So I've never told this story live. I've told it like at a dinner a couple of times. But I'm going to try it. It's the first time I remember failing. I'm sure I failed before this, but the first time I remember failing, I was about 10, and I was playing on a soccer team, AOISO soccer. And I wasn't that good, but you know, I had my little yellow shirt, black shorts, and my shin guards, and the ball came to me, and I kicked it into the goal, and for a split second, I was the hero. Like, the not-so-good soccer player was the hero. And then I realized what had happened. I kicked the ball into our own goal. Yeah. And I had this sickening feeling in my stomach, like awful. And I ran off the field, and I never went back. And I didn't go back the next day. I didn't go back the next year. Like I've literally never played soccer since. And it would be a much better story if I could say that I went back and I got back on the horse. Or then I went to college 8 years later and I was on the college soccer team, but it actually didn't happen. And instead I spent the next 8 years literally doing everything I could think of to get out of PE class and not play sports. I sprained my own finger. I played the trumpet because when you're in the marching band, you didn't have to take PE. I mean, I did everything to not play sports. But then I got to college, and I did start running. I did a little bit of biking, a little bit of swimming, and that was pretty good. And then a few many years later, at a holiday party, after one too many glasses of wine, some friends and I were standing around, and I said, "Of course I'll do a triathlon with you." I said I would. So I hadn't been running, biking, or swimming much, but I threw myself at it. And I have to tell you, that wasn't the only triathlon as it turned out, but that first finish line, crossing that finish line, was like, I did it. I didn't have to run away. It was my victory, and I could own it. It was awesome. So the lesson for me there about failure is that it might take 25 years for redemption. But, you know, if you're patient, remember what I said, lifelong, it'll come. So I waited. and it came. And, you know, not surprisingly then, my other lesson about failure also came from sports. About a year ago, I decided to start weightlifting. You know, as women, we lose muscle mass faster than men and faster as we age, and we need muscle mass if our bones are going to keep carrying us around. And so I started weightlifting. And one of the things I learned in weightlifting was this concept called training to failure. Anybody learned this? A few of you. So training to failure is very interesting. The idea is you lift as much weight as you possibly can to the point that on the last rep of each set, you actually can't lift it anymore. Like literally, somebody catch this, I can't lift it anymore, only you can't speak. And so you push yourself, and it's at that point where you actually can't do it that your muscle starts to generate more muscle tissue. So you train to failure. So the first few times I tried this with the trainer I was working with, David, and David would say, go to failure, and I'd say, I don't like to fail. I literally would say with this thing, I don't like to fail. And then after a while I'd say, I failed, and he'd say, victory. And I now, as I'm doing it, I'm like, I failed. And it kind of is interesting because I find now I'm using it at work. And I do. So if I just can't get through all the work and the email and the things, the really important things I need to be taken care of, sometimes I just say to myself, I failed, you know, victory, yay. It's hard, but you know, it's as I try it, I find it's kind of uplifting. So try it. But that failure thing, it's like you got to find a way to make failure something that you just step through. It's part of where you dig in and you dig deep and you step through and you keep going. So we talked about insight, we talked about courage. The last thing of the three that I think helps when it's so hard is love. And it starts with yourself, and I know we've all heard that, but finding a way to be kind and generous to yourself. A friend told me years ago, she said, Karen, you're your best self every day, but sometimes your best self isn't that good. Like, it's okay, you know, your best self is going to be variable. So be gentle with yourself. So being kind to yourself, it's really also important to be kind to others. And again, we talk a lot about that too. And someone asked me, well, okay, so how? We can say it, we can talk about it. Tammy talked about being esoteric, but how do we actually do it? So one of the ways I actually try to do this is to think, okay, that person who I'm not feeling kind about right now, they're doing whatever they're doing for some reason that seems to make sense to them. Like most people wake up in the morning in order to make the world better, to get some good work done. And so if I assume that, then what's their reality that makes what they just did actually seem like the right thing to do today? And if I can climb into their shoes and climb into their reality and try to understand where they're coming from, then it helps me appreciate that and figure out where we might be able to meet in the middle. So I think kindness comes from empathy. It comes from taking someone else's perspective. I remember driving when I was a kid in the car, and some car cut us off, and I don't remember, my brother, someone said, hey, what was that? My dad saying, you know, you don't know where that person's going. They could be rushing to the hospital. Well, there's only one person in that car. You don't know who's laying down in the back seat. Like, that person might be rushing someone to the hospital, and that's the most important thing right now. And I don't think about that particular example all that often, but the concept of, like, what actually made that the right thing to do is really powerful for me. So you've got kindness to yourself, kindness to others, and then surround yourself with people who will hold you. I've mentioned my brother already. I just adore my brother, and I was one of those people in a ball, you know, rolled up crying in my car, actually, talking to him, pulled over to the side of the road, saying, I'm going to disappoint you, and I'm going to disappoint mom and dad, and I'm going to disappoint people at work, and said, Sissy, you already made it to the Olympics. He's like, you're you. You can't disappoint us. Go screw up and test it. You can't. You're you. It's already done. You already are. And it was just this beautiful, like, so it's already there. So finding people who will hold you no matter what is another part of the love that helps you pick yourself back up and go at it when you're really trying to be your best self. So I leave you with a thought that maybe ties some of that together. That to emerge requires looking in the mirror and confronting the awful truth that you're flawed. And then digging really, really deep to find the grace to go back out and say, tell me more. And trusting that you'll have the strength and the support to hear it